Welcome! Hello to all our participants from the Artful Afternoon program, and a warm welcome to any folks who are joining us for the first time. For those of you who have never heard of the program, Artful Afternoon is a dementia-friendly art program at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia in partnership with the Alzheimer Society of Nova Scotia. The program takes place on the last Sunday of the month, and while the program is at no cost, registration for in-person programming is essential. As our in-person programming is postponed for the time being, we have opened up the online space to include a larger number of people for whom may find this beneficial. So we're pleased to share the program with you. We'll be delivering our last two sessions virtually, this early May one and another one at the end of May, so mark your calendars. This video will be approximately 40 to 50 minutes in length, so please get comfortable and feel free to pause and prep as needed. We will first be doing a short grounding exercise, followed by an exploration of artworks at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, and finishing off by completing our very own piece inspired by the historical works of art. The video will be accompanied by a step-by-step visual and written document breaking down the information in this video, for you to access as many and as often as you need. So, some of you might be feeling a range of emotions during these uncertain times. In light of this, we thought it would be valuable and fun to connect and make some art. So before we get started, I want to share some guiding grounding instructions. If you've never heard of this term before, it's become a recent common therapeutic exercise to stay focused on the present moment and can help give you a sense of calm and control when things feel overwhelming. So, to get started, get as comfortable as you can in your chair. Look gently around the room and bring your awareness to the ceiling for a moment, and then to a wall or a point far away from you. Next, bring your awareness to the space just in front of you, about 2 feet in front of you. Notice how you can move your awareness around to different spots. Now, let your attention go inward. Feel free to close your eyes if that's comfortable. We're going to explore our inner mind and take a look around, as if we're floating comfortably on a calm lake. Allow your awareness to find your breath wherever you can find it easily. Your nostrils, your chest, your belly, lungs, and just follow the wave of your breath in and out. Recognize your breath as the anchor for a buoy in the center of your lake or a central spot in your meadow, like holding on to the string of a kite. Your breath can be the anchor for the rest of the activity in your mind, such as your thoughts, any images, etc. So when you notice your thoughts floating away somewhere else, allow your anchor or kite string to catch and gently pull your awareness back to your breath. Continue to follow these waves of your breath. Today we will be taking a special look at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia's permanent collection. We will be looking at a range of historical to contemporary still life compositions. I wanted to explore the art genre of still life particularly because it's so long-standing and so wide-ranging. This genre, a still life work of art, depicts mostly inanimate subject matter, typically commonplace objects which are either natural, such as food, flowers, dead animals, plants, rocks, shells, and or man-made items, which commonly historically were domestic items like drinking glasses, vases, books, jewelry, coins, etc. Though this term emerged with Western painting, still lifes go back as far as ancient Egyptian tomb painting. In ancient Rome, still lives were often a celebration of life and the changes of the 4 seasons. Though much of Dutch still life painting was often focused on optical realism, during the Renaissance, Italian painters made use of still lifes for their allegorical meanings and symbolic religious potential that often functioned as a reminder of the temporality of life and the passing of time. Because still lives were rarely commissioned, but rather sold in open markets by dealers or artists themselves, it often gave artists the freedom to choose the subject matter and arrangement. I find this particularly interesting, especially because much of what we see throughout art history has emerged through patronage, often displaying the personal tastes and cultural motivations of the patrons. I've ordered the images in chronological order, and you can slowly see how the still life transforms and becomes deconstructed over time. Colors become less realistic. Colors can be more vivid, can be emotive. Mark making changes, different applications of paint and drawing materials surface. In the instance of Gerard Collins, space is completely disrupted. An imaginary pattern dominates the space, giving the sense of flatness amongst the vessel's three-dimensionality. In the instance of David Atkin's still life, we have all-over movement. There are many layers of still lives interacting, some more shape-based and representational, and then quick, loose marks disrupting all the space and depth being created. Color takes on an emotive experience in this piece. There are so many marks and so many layers of transparency that it's hard to know where to focus your eye. In opposition to Atkin, Gerald Ferguson has a very centralized composition, using only black and white to compose his piece. Here he's using a technique called frottage, which means rubbings, of shapes. This is a fantastic example of a deconstructed still life. There is no vessel. There's no sense of space. There's no sense of depth. The focus is on form, repeat pattern, and the immediacy of the mark. The next four examples by Helen Weld are fantastic studies. They're studies because you can tell that they're done extremely quickly and with a lot of feeling. They're called studies because they're studies of the act of observation, taking in the information in front of you as clearly and as quickly as you can. It also is focused on choosing the angle of your composition. You can tell by the outline of the rectangle that she was trying to decide how to frame the objects in front of her. Framing the scene in front of you is a big part of composing your piece. Because you're working within parameters, that is a rectangle, you need to decide what will fit and what won't fit into that square. Let these four diverse studies really inspire you. You can tell by the quickness of the marks that the experience of drawing and looking was really important to her. Be curious. Look at the items that you see every single day a little bit differently. So the project we will explore today includes many materials that you will likely already have in your own homes. I have also made a written PDF document available with a list of amazing alternatives that can be used to achieve a similar visual effect. So, before we get started, I just want to remind folks that there is no wrong way to participate in art making. Please feel free to watch the video as often as you like or need, and that the activity can be done at your own pace. Try putting on some music, create a very calm, peaceful environment so that you can just feel very comfortable exploring this really exciting way about reinterpreting the space that you inhabit. There are two major components to the art activity we're going to be doing today. Firstly, we're going to be collecting items and composing them to make our still life scene, and then we're going to be trying to capture the scene in two-dimensional form. So this is the still life scene I set up for our activity today. You can see those really incredible shadows on the wall. I've also made sure that there's enough space right in front of here so that I can create my two-dimensional work. I also have enough space to get really close and capture all the details in this still life. So when choosing objects for my still life, it was really important to me to choose things that were visually interesting to me and things that have a sort of fondness to them, things that make me feel good, things that bring back certain memories of times and feelings. So here, this is a sweet little silk handkerchief that a friend made for me. The images on top are printed by some of her artwork. This is a lovely jade necklace that my mother gave me. I inherited from her. I like to think it brings me good luck, and I really wanted to include that in today's composition. This is a super piece of driftwood I found at the beach. Really curious shape. Kind of looks like a beak. Really love it. I especially wanted to include a bouquet. Flowers that a friend gave me, but also flowers that I collect over the seasons. You can see there's this sweet little teapot handmade by a friend of mine. So that's fond memories too. I thought that this lovely little candle holder made out of glass reflects lights and shadows very interestingly. And especially, I have this necklace, too precious to wear, but I love the repeat patterns and the textures and the colors. So I really wanted to add that. Figured it'd be really fun to bring some design, some repetition, and some color to the piece. So before getting into the second component of our art activity, drawing our still lives, I'd like to quickly go over the materials required. So here we have some plain old printer paper, 8 by 11. It's a little bit thin, but absolutely works. Next we have some cardstock. Cardstock is really super because it's sturdier, so it can take some really vigorous mark making, but also it can handle some wetness as well, which is very cool if you plan on using some aqueous mediums. You have some food coloring or some paint around you'd like to use. And last but not least, some toned, lightly toned in this case, construction paper. So especially after having seen some of the historical examples, background tone can add a lot of depth and dimension to the work that we're doing. So completely an option as well. It's up to you and whatever you have available. So next are mark making tools. We can either use pencil, sharpener, eraser. If that's all we have available, perfectly fine. Ballpoint pen can be an excellent tool for illustrating and cross-hatching, which is a shading technique. For coloring, we have some coloring pencils here. These can work really well. If all you have are crayons, that works super well as well. Markers. But once again, colors are totally not necessary. It's completely up to you. So in the case of optional materials, I've got a dried palette here. This is food coloring. So something that most of you have over your home, in your homes rather than paint. Works just as well, especially diluted. So you can use food coloring. Another option is tea or coffee to create a nice brown, warm stain. If you're using aqueous mediums, then we need some paper towel, a few brushes, and a little water container as well. So all of our options right there. You can be really creative about the optional materials that you have at home. A lot more things can make marks than you may realize. Here I've got some whiteout, fantastic tool for highlights. I've got a big chunky Sharpie, which can be super intimidating because it's not very forgiving, but absolutely super fun to use. So I think it's really important to emphasize that realism doesn't need to be intimidating. It can be really quick and it can be a process of build up as well. So a great way to feel comfortable at first is to use pencil. And there's two different approaches we can use. We can either start by using line to define things, or we can start by using shape. So if you start practicing drawing, you'll tend to find that you gravitate towards one more than the other, and they can actually complement each other very, very well. So we'll start first with our teapot because it's quite a large shape. So just loosely, just the general shape. You can see I'm doing this quite quickly. Doesn't need to be too accurate at all. I'm finding my branch here. It's covering the teapot. And so you'll notice I'm not lifting my pencil too often either. This is called continuous line drawing, and I find it's almost like automatic writing. It's an activity that just forces you to jump right in. And then you can go in afterwards and make it more precise afterwards if that's what you like. I quite love quick drawings as well because they're really emotive. You can tell that they've been done with a kind of speediness, immediacy, a lot more feeling in them. Kind of just loosely feeling out all these petals of the candle here. Those coming towards me, a bit more tricky to define their shape. Once again, not being too hung up on detail. Oh, there's the bottom of the pot. And okay, let's just drag that fabric out. Let's find the other side too. And so really, you're also making decisions about how to frame the piece. If your lines extend past the paper, it gives a sense of reality and expansiveness, right? Just like a photograph, that when you're framing something, there's always going to be part of it that extends past, continues the narrative in a way. So there's my mother's necklace, all the sweet little details, try not to get too hung up on them. Oh, a little chain. All right, so now the flowers. Fun because they're so organic in the first place. You can kind of just make it up as you go. Lots of petals going upwards. When we get to shading and shape afterwards, that's when we can really start giving it some depth. There we go. All the way twisting through the pot. I quite love still lives too, just in terms of the potential for metaphors, right? But in this respect, they're all personal items, so you're kind of telling your own narrative about your items and your space. Especially as somebody like myself that believes that items that we hold, they all have a history, right? Imbued with different stories, especially handmade things, things we inherit. And so you can tell at this point, I'm very loosely looking, but more just letting my hand do whatever it wants, especially these big squiggly organic forms here. There we go. And so for the fun part, I've got my necklace here in front with all those big triangle shapes. All the way around, and some more layers. You see how quickly I'm laying this all out? But it's just a general mapping out of the things that I'm seeing rather than getting really caught up in individual details. That fun comes later. I'm gonna do all these little guys right now. So now for shape-basedness, I can start going in and just focusing on some darker areas, and that will help define roundness, depth. The side of the candle is darker, just loosely. Glass is a particularly tricky one. Can have lots of fun, can be really quite abstract looking too. Flowers. The bottom of the pot, of course, is darker. I've created these shadows here that help not only to define the pot, but to the space in front of it. There we go. And with pencils, so lovely is how just the hardness of your marks, just how hard you press can help define the space really well. There we go. And especially after looking at some of those other samples, Helen Weld's work, for example, you can see how they're so quickly mapped out. Just studies and studies and studies about how spaces interact, negative space between items, shapes. You see I'm also moving all around the page to not get caught up in a single area. Here we go. Oh, and of course I'm forgetting those beautiful shadows on the wall. So shadows are very hard to do linearly because they're so elusive, but you just kind of rub your pencil really lightly. And that's helping us define a forward space and a back space already. Especially lightness. Lightness always comes forward visually in optics, and darkness goes backwards. Gives us a sense of depth. There we go. So that's just a pretty quick study right there. You can see that. And then in relation to the work, right there. So I'd like to show you another example of a pencil drawing I did earlier, but this one you can see I started defining in more detail. So this one, very quick sketch, and then I slowed down and started focusing in. So before we were doing a technique called continuous line drawing to help us just get warmed up, get all those marks out, just like here, just quick, loose marks. And then I start slowing down and doing something called contour drawing. So contour drawing has to do with heaviness and lightness. So it's a great way to define depth just by pushing harder with your pencil, and then light. So because this part of the blanket is underneath, well, the handkerchief, it's hard and then light, hard and then light. You can see that it's already giving it a sense of depth over here, and it's helping me navigate how I'm going to shade this piece. With the candle especially, lots of pieces that interact, that go up and down, up and down. When I first discovered contour drawing, it changed everything. It became all about how line can define volume instead of just shading. I always understood shading and blending as the pure way to create depth. So hard and light, hard and light. Let's try going over to this side a little bit. So the teapot, hard and then light, then around the bottom, hard again. It can certainly take some practice, but once you start doing it, then you start realizing how much potential a single line can have in defining volume. Hard and light. There you go. Contour drawing to create volume versus our original drawing, which was very much about shading and shapes to fill up space. Two very different approaches. And the more you draw them, the more intuitive it'll become to combine the two, to experiment, to just keep trying different angles, different lightings. So I wanted to show you an example of ballpoint pen as well. So ballpoint pen is unlike a pencil. It can't do shading through rubbing, but it can do shading through frequency in line work. So this is what I mentioned before about cross-hatching. Cross-hatching is literally the action of creating little crosses. And the density in those lines will start to create shadow. So you can tell here, my lines started getting very densely close together to create some darkness all around here. And you can tell too with the ballpoint pen, it has more of an illustrative quality. So by that I mean it's pretty distinct in terms of what you're seeing is what you get. There's no mystery in the same way that with pencil, where you need to define, it's hard to define little corners of light and darkness. Another example I want to show you. So here, this one was a combination of ballpoint pen. You can see the line work is all ballpoint pen. So no shading was happening with the pencil, but just using the ballpoint pen to do the cross-hatching. And then the shading came in through use of color. So color is an interesting one too, because it does not need to be realistic or representative of the actual colors you're seeing at all. You can use color in a very symbolic way. So for example, I've got these two guys here. Leaving them white, could that refer to something? A hidden narrative maybe that I want to imbue in the piece? So I've colored this work with layering lots of different coloring pencils. And I'd like to show you really quick how combining some aqueous medium here can help add for some more depth. So let's see, I want to create some depth underneath here. You see it's already putting some solid color, is putting our eye directly to that area, right? It's putting things backwards and forwards in space. And I'm not taking too much time painting obsessively either, just nice and quick. There's so many different approaches to something as simple as a still life, you know? Reconsidering these items we surround ourselves with, but also the simple act of drawing and how healing it can be to just get out of your head and into your hands. So I'm going to be using some more over here, some more of the color to create some of that heaviness in the sheets there, to try and get some of the ripples. Oh, this side too. This side definitely needs some. There we go. I'm gonna try some blue on that teapot. That teapot has some distinct blue at the edges. Oh, there we go. Look at that. Really bright. So like I say, there's lots of different ways to get some aqueous mediums. I often use tea when I've run out of things to use. I use tea and coffee, make for really beautiful earthy washes. And inherently using earthy colors, things like that, they'll help it look kind of aged too, which is really nice. It'll look like kind of like a historical piece, just inherently that way. There we go. And for this one, I did not draw those beautiful shadows on the wall, so I'm going to just go ahead and use color to do that. Get kind of wild. And here, the colors don't need to be prescriptive of the shadow color at all. So I'm just gonna go wild with the brush and just jump right into it. It's funny too, because depending on your still life, you can feel like you've mastered a certain angle of it, and then you just try it from another side, and you could be seeing entirely different things. Looking at the items from a different angle can create different imagery. And in all this, I didn't use too much symbolism, I guess. Flowers, of course, have their history in still lives, referring to the passage of time and domesticity and loved ones. But you can create your own symbolic language, bringing in items that have that specific meaning to you. There we go. Kind of looks stormy, eh? I like that. Big stormy background. Yeah. You can remember some of the pieces, historical pieces. Some works don't use much color at all, but when they do use that one color, then that one color becomes very significant because it's used selectively, right? So many different approaches. There we go. Nice and quick. Just added some color. That's it for this guy. Added our color to our still life. One last example I wanted to show you is having a toned ground before starting. Totally not necessary, but then this goes in the same way as having our construction paper, colored construction paper, where there's already some kind of imagery going on for us to pull the work out of. In the case with using aqueous mediums as a toned background, it's super good to use some tape first, just because paper, when it gets wet, tends to ripple. So here, you can see there's this nice little trim just around the edges. It's because before I started working, I had taped my paper down, just so that it would stay nice and flat. So now that it's dry, of course you can still do your marks on it while it's still wet. You'll just have a different kind of marks will come up. But I've waited for this one to dry up. And now I'm just gonna do my pencil drawing on here. Same like before, nice and quick. I like to start with the teapot because it's so central, I guess, and then work outwards. Of course, you can start at an edge as well, not a problem. Some people like to start up to down, some people like to start down to up. It's also really fun to also investigate the way that you tend to make things, you know? Like have that dialogue with yourself about, oh, why am I drawn to working this way? Or this is feeling really natural to me. I'm going to do more of this. So all those kind of lessons kind of come through increased drawing practice. As you can tell, I'm going so loose now. I'm just half making up, very loose based on the marks that I'm seeing. Just very loose. No pressure. Drawing is such an innate, universal language, I think, that we all have. Very quick. And then sometimes, depending on my mood too, sometimes I'll focus on line a lot, but today I'm feeling like just jumping in and doing some shading to help define some space. So you can see that intense shadow behind the candle there on the pot. That's going to help define what comes forward, what comes back. That rim, that sweet little rim on top there of the teapot. Try and give it some roundness. What's amazing too is that still lifes have existed for much of prehistory, but also globally, right? And they're so representative of the inner lives and domestic environments and symbology value to a specific culture. Your work can involve photographs as well. You can include photos, a standing photograph of a family member or a friend. That would be fun too. And don't feel the need to get too caught up in making it look realistic. Just get it out there. That'll come with time. Often the focus on realism can get us lost and can get us preoccupied with finished product instead of the process, when this is, I think, what is truly healing and really important. There we go. Oh, there goes those triangles. I really loved including this piece. It gives me so much freedom just to put all these forms and repeating patterns in there. Oh, and get those flowers in. And so here I'm starting to lose sense of my marks. So if I want to see something, I got to press a little bit harder just for it to come forward. There we go. There we go. Shadow on the walls. I think I'm going to add some color right now. And also, it doesn't have to be multiple colors at all. It could just be one, just monochromatic. Just what's so lovely about coloring pencils is that they behave similarly to pencils, right? So you can blend with them and smudge, whereas markers are pretty one-dimensional in terms of just the amount of depth that's going to be in that mark. my purple candle. There we go. Make some purple marks here. Oh, and the wood piece. And my mom's necklace. And this little heart shape. So I did put my own symbology in there too, I guess. Imbued, hidden in there. So last but not least, on toned paper like this, some of the supplemental materials I was mentioning about, like whiteout and Sharpies, they can be really fun additions because there's already tone underneath. So I can bring out lightness through whiteout, and then if I want to see my marks more clearly, I can use my Sharpie. So because markers are harder to control, what I would suggest is trying to use the contour drawing technique of pushing lightly and harder to try and keep a bit of dynamic mark making in there. So we can go lightly and then hard. So not much of a difference there, but still fun to play around with. And then markers. You can see how immediately illustrative it becomes when you have a big black mark like that, eh? But all fun nonetheless. It can be fun layering all these different mediums together, almost like a game of discovery, you know? Because you're pulling things out that were harder to see, pushing things back that you decide you don't want to see anymore. Here, I'm actually able to achieve. That was tough with this big Sharpie. Some small little thin marks there. Give a sense of depth. That candle, there we go. And this. Just quick. And the wood. Pushing hard down here because I wanted to show that there's some depth and shadow down this area. And then of course my mom's little heart. Yeah, so you can bring focus on the areas you like and you can avoid others that you don't want to. So keep forgetting these wild little dried flowers here. So you can be very precise with markers, but you can be very imprecise as well. Different energies. Very refined pieces. With marks like this can actually look really constrained, right? So there really is no what's better or what's worse. Depends on what you're going for. This one has a lot more movement, a lot more dynamicism, right? So just lots of different examples. Using the exact same scene right in front of us. Lots of different outcomes. Thank you so much for tuning in and taking the time to participate today. We sincerely hope you enjoyed this activity. Please be sure to share with friends you think would enjoy an artistic escape. Also, we would love to see your art pieces. If you're on Facebook, we welcome you to share photos of your work and tag the Alzheimer Society of Nova Scotia. If you do not have Facebook, or if you would like to share them anonymously, please send them by email to alzheimer@asns.ca. Thank you. Bye.